Hello and welcome to Fade to PB8. In this episode, we'll be coloring in a 3D printer that just made a frog. Now, right off the bat, I'm going to state that I think the frog came out a little bit too dark. I was trying to do a dark green filament to hide some of these lines right here, which you'll see in a moment. But overall, I give myself a B minus on this one. I just think the frog came out wrong. Everything else looks really great, and I think there's a lot of things we can still learn from it. So I'll go ahead and start from the beginning and walk you through step by step kind of my thought process and how I achieved some of the colors that I ended up with. Hope you enjoy. Thank you. So first take a look at the frog. Now you'll see that it's got some lines on its back, and normally a line indicates some sort of color change or an edge of an object, but it's a 3D printed object, which means it's a solid filament color, which is why I went with like just a solid green. And I went with a darker green to try to hide some of those lines. And so that's what I was talking about a little bit earlier. So for the background, I'm trying to work a shadow. So the light source is going to be kind of to the left, like pretty much directly in front of the printer. And I've got basically 2 or 3 colors going on here. And when you fill in like a large surface area, there's a couple things to keep in mind. Number one, you really have to go over it a lot because it might end up kind of like splotchy. It's hard to get like a really nice, flat, monotone color if you don't go over it multiple times, because what ends up happening is you go really slow around the edges and then you can just gloss over the middle parts, and then when it dries the middle parts look a lot lighter than the edges, so you have to make sure that you saturate equally. And there's a good trick to this. You can actually flip the paper over and take a look at the backside, and that will show you kind of the spots that you went over a little bit more or a little bit less, and I'll do that here momentarily. So I'm working these shadows in, and I normally go light to dark, but here I'm throwing the shadow in with kind of like this light warm gray, and then I'm immediately going over it with that original the lightest warm gray color. And by doing so, I'm just mixing the inks together on the paper while it's still wet. I didn't let that first color dry. I made sure that I went over both of them while it was still wet, and it just gives a nice. It just brings the colors together. It makes the shadow look real on the wall. So one thing you should really note is that when the ink starts to dry, that's when you'll see those splotchy parts start to appear. The parts that you glossed over pretty quickly are going to dry faster, and as it dries, it actually lines up quite a bit. But you'll see kind of like bits of the paper. So this is 80-pound paper. It's a little bit thicker, and thicker paper means you're going to have to go over it more times. But with thicker paper, you can go over it more times compared to, say, printer paper. And by being able to go over more times, it makes it easier to blend, it makes it easier to change colors, make corrections to mistakes, even lighten up the ink a bit, which is tough to do on printer paper. So that's why I usually use thicker paper. So I just keep an eye on the background and make sure that it's drying up evenly. If a spot is drying up too quickly, I might just go over it one more time real quick. So for the table, kind of the same thing. I'm going over each spot probably 2 or 3 times, just doing quick pass-throughs. I'm not just going over it once and calling it a day. And I'm going over the entire table with this base brown, but I'm going to come in later with the darker brown. And so you might ask, like, why go over the entire table with that first brown and then come in with the darker brown later? Like, why not just leave those shadow spots blank and then, save a tiny bit of ink? Well, you want to blend the inks together and make sure that they go together. These browns fade pretty well one into the other. Sometimes you get colors that are part of the same family that maybe they don't go together so well, and that's when you really, really want to blend them together. So I usually start with the areas of the drawing that aren't going to get as much attention, and the reason why I do that is because, I'm kind of warming up, and you're kind of molding the image like a piece of clay, and I kind of use parts of the colored sections to determine what colors to use for the next section. So when I do the frog, I can take a look at the background right behind them. And I'm doing a 3D printer first before I do the frog. So I'll be able to see the base plate. I'll be able to see basically just what the printer looks like. And then I can compare my colors. Make sure I don't go too dark or too light, even though I do go a little bit dark on the frog. But overall, this drawing turns out, I think, pretty nicely. So I've got a selection of grays. I'm using mostly grays for this drawing, probably half grays and half normal colors, but more grays than I normally use. These are metallic parts, so it just kind of makes sense to use grays. And I use the Ohuhu colors. I really like Ohuhu a lot, just because they have so many different colors. And I've tried Copics before a little bit, but you're basically getting the same colors for like 5 times the price. So I don't really see a huge advantage to doing the Copics. I think these ones blend just fine. But if you really want a nicer, the finest quality marker, Copic would be the way to go. But these Ohuhu markers, they're about $1 each, and I think it just makes sense. So here I am doing the base plate. Now I'm actually using the Copic grays here. I think the Copic grays that aren't colored are much nicer because they have a very steady gradient. And I'm using Neutral Gray 4. I wasn't sure how dark I wanted to go, but I knew it was safe to start off with a lighter gray because I can always go darker. And that's what I end up doing. So I get the whole paper wet with Neutral Gray 4, and then I'm going to come in with Neutral Gray 5 and just darken everything up to make it look a little bit more realistic. I think that color was a little bit too light. So all neutral grays for the build plate. And I want to have slight variations, like the front of the build plate and the top of the build plate. They're probably going to get about the equal amount of light, so they'll be about the same color. But I still want to have some variation to create some illusion of it being three-dimensional. So here I'm coming in with my N5, Neutral Gray 5. And I'm hitting everything, not just the areas that are going to end up being that color. I'm also hitting the areas that I'm going to go over, like the shadow areas. I'm still going over those because I'm just stepping up each part of the drawing. I don't need to do that. Like, sure, I could go to the shadows right away and hit with like N6 or N7, but I think it just blends a little bit better. These Copics, they're so close together and they've got such a nice gradient that, yeah, I probably could have done that. But with the Ohuhu brands, the colors are a little bit more scattered, so you really want to go over everything with your base color and then just step it up. And then every time you introduce the next marker, which you should be going lightest to darkest, every time you introduce that next darker marker, add it to the darkest area of the drawing and just see what it looks like. Because chances are you're going to go over that darkest drawing with a darker marker, and then the colors that you're putting down are just going to disappear on you because you're going over it with a darker marker, and the darker markers dominate. So you end up, since the darker markers dominate so much, you end up using the lighter markers quite a bit more. Pastel sets are really great to purchase because those light markers kind of turn into blenders as well. A lot of times I suggest kind of working your way up, light to dark, and then working your way back down, dark to light. And that way you just get a really nice blend. Now, with that build plate there, I had gone over each section, 3, 4, 5 times, and that kind of revisits what I was saying earlier with going over each part of the drawing 2 or 3 times minimum, just because it's going to end up looking a little bit splotchy. So here's my my cat. Here's my cat making a little visit, and I had to push her off the table, but I always have good company. And so, when you choose your colors, yeah, you want to go for a real look. Now, I like to choose my colors ahead of time, and I can kind of compare. Like, I pick out my markers ahead of time. I have an idea of what each section is going to look like, but I pick out my markers for a few reasons. Number one is that it can take some time to pick out your markers, and once the ink hits the paper, it does start to dry, and we like to work with wet ink, so have your markers out and ready to go. The second reason is I like to use different colors for different sections. I like to avoid using the same colors unless it makes sense, unless it's like a base color or a common color, which I'll do later with kind of the parts scattered in front of the 3D printer. But I just want to make each part kind of look unique, and just I think this 3D printer looks pretty nice because I use different grays for different parts of it. Okay, so here I go with the frog, and I start with I think it's so on the Ohuhu scale. They've got the last digit or 2 digits indicates how dark it is. So this is green 311, I think, and the scale goes from 0 to 16. So starting with a 11 is pretty dark, and I should have known better. But again, I was trying to hide some of those lines on his backs, which is why I went with a darker color. And this is a large surface area. It's relatively monotone because it's all the same filament color. And so I just I really saturate. You can see I'm flipping over the page to take a look. And if you would notice that the center of the frog, I didn't go over. It didn't get nearly as saturated as the edges. And that's because the center you can just go over really, really quickly. But with the edges, you have to go a little bit slower, and then the ink will flow more as you're going slower. So you want to make sure that the center saturation kind of matches the edges as well. So now I'm applying some shadow here, and just I'm just stepping it up, going my second lightest. And then you can actually go to the darkest marker. Some people like to go dark to light. I only go dark to light if the paper is already wet. So I might start with always start with the lightest color, then probably work the second lightest color, and then I might actually go to the darkest color and then work my way backwards back to those light spots. It's really up to you. And it kind of depends on the object you're doing. But this one, the shading actually turns out pretty nicely, I think, when it dries up. Now, drying is important. I mean, we're not going to see what you're looking at now. It's not going to look like that when it's all done, because when it dries, the ink gets quite a bit lighter. So you just want to monitor, keep an eye on it when it's drying. If one spot is drying quicker than other spots, just go over it again. Just means that you hit it a little bit too lightly. So you really, really, really want to have an even distribution of ink as much as you possibly can, because when it dries, it will look a little bit different. And there I am flipping over the frog. I put some weight on it to prevent it from warping, because it really did get saturated quite a lot. And when it gets saturated, it will warp on you a tiny bit. So just let it dry, and with some weight on top. Now, I apologize. I forgot to hit record for this section, so I already colored in a couple of the objects. But basically what I'm doing here is I'm sharing common colors. I've got these YGYs from the Copics, from the Ohuhus, which is just a type of gray. And I shade everything in with those grays, and then I just choose a color and just gloss over it with that color, that one single color, like a yellow or an orange, and just giving each object its own unique color. And the important thing here is that, like, each object, it looks different, but it also looks like it goes together. So by sharing those common colors, it looks like it goes together. So that wraps up this drawing. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something, and let me know what you think in the comment section. Thank you very much.